Good morning. This is the mop-up for May 15th, 2023. I'm David Feldman. America, you're not special, but democracy is. There are 100 million refugees worldwide. That's the largest number ever recorded, even after World War II. We've got more refugees right now than we had after World War II, and Turkey hosts more refugees than any other nation. 3.5 million Syrian refugees fled to Turkey during that country's 12-year civil war. That's more than half the total number of refugees from Syria. They're living in Turkey. Millions of war-torn refugees have ended up in Turkey from Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Tens of thousands of Russians have fled to Turkey after the invasion of Ukraine, which, of course, resulted in a flood of Ukrainians pouring in to Turkey. That's why Turkey's president, Tayyip Erdogan, is in constant contact with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, trying to stop the fighting in Ukraine, while at the same time negotiating agreements to keep the grain and fertilizer from Ukraine flowing through the Black Sea into the Mediterranean and over to Africa to prevent more famine. Turkey is strategically located, to say the least. And what happens in Turkey affects the rest of the world, because what happens in the rest of the world always seems to affect Turkey. To understand the current tensions inside Turkey right now, try to imagine how much you all hate people like me from New York City. You think we're elitists. You think we're better than everybody. You think we're loud and that we want what we want when we want it. None of that is true about us. It's just how we're perceived because it's mostly true. Now, imagine an environmental catastrophe. A tidal wave hits New York City, wipes it out. Imagine if it wiped out Wall Street, for example. Just imagine Wall Street being wiped out by a tidal wave. Just give me a few seconds for my hard-on to subside. Okay, don't imagine Wall Street being wiped out. Imagine all of New York City wiped out. Okay, now you got millions of people like me forced to flee New York City. And imagine we somehow end up in a foreign land with strangers whose customs are not just different, but go against our teachings. We end up in a place that is mostly hostile and inscrutable. I don't know, let's say we end up in some horrific place like Florida. We end up as refugees living in Florida. Millions of angry New Yorkers forced to live in Florida. Millions of angry New Yorkers forced to live among xenophobes, racists, bigots, and morons. In other words, Miami Beach. That's what Turkey is, Miami Beach, but with a lot less loudmouth a-holes. So those are the tensions that you have right now in Turkey as they vote Sunday night, as we count the votes Sunday night. There's a lot of tension, a lot of refugees, a lot of people living in Turkey who don't necessarily want to be living in Turkey. Turkey, as I said, voted on Sunday for both their president and their parliament. And it now looks like Turkey's presidential elections, the presidential elections, will be heading for a May 28th runoff with 69-year-old incumbent President Erdogan, who has been leading Turkey for 20 years, and his challenger, 79-year-old Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu. I worked on that. Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu. I'm not going to get it right, but I'm going to try. It's Erdogan versus 79-year-old Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu. Both have failed to get more than 50%. It looks like they failed to get more than 50% of the vote, which is required by law in Turkey to be declared president. Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu represents the center-left Republican People's Party, and that's him on the right. It's a coalition of 6 parties who identify with the secular principles of modern Turkey, founded 100 years ago by Ataturk after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the socially conservative President Erdogan, he's on the left. On the other hand, he has spent the past 20 years using Islam and his police to consolidate power, change the Constitution to hollow out democratic institutions like the judiciary and parliament, while arresting his critics along the way. Erdogan was elected prime minister in 2003. He was elected president 5 years ago in a snap election called during a state of emergency that he declared after an attempted coup against him in 2016. When Erdogan first came to power in 2003, he was not popular in America because he wanted to erode Turkey's separation of mosque and state, a core principle of post-Ottoman Turkey. President George W. Bush didn't like Erdogan because he, like all Republicans, is a strong believer in the separation of mosque and state. Separation of church and state, well, that's for another episode. But Republicans definitely believe in a separation of mosque and state. Now, Erdogan used the 2016 coup against him to declare emergency powers and then introduced a constitutional referendum, which resulted in voters narrowly agreeing to change Turkey's government from a parliamentary system to a more centralized presidential system, weakening the legislative branch by eliminating the position of prime minister, a title Erdogan previously held. I think he held it up until 2014 and then became president. This constitutional switch to a presidential system back in 2017 also minimized the judicial oversight necessary to rein President Erdogan in. Human Rights Watch reported that while Turkey's presidential election back in 2017 was free, Erdogan failed to win it fairly, considering all radio and television stations had just been privatized, ending up in the hands of Erdogan supporters who silenced any criticism of his government. After winning that election in 2017, President Erdogan fired 100,000 civil servants. Sounds like something Steve Bannon recommended to Donald Trump if he was going to get reelected. That was Erdogan's plan, to fire everybody in our civil service and reshape it in Trump's image. After winning that election in 2017, Erdogan began arresting on charges of terrorism journalists, human rights activists, as well as members of the opposition parties, including the leader of the People's Democratic Party. Human Rights Watch says many of these people were tortured while in police custody. Voters on Sunday also went to the polls to elect members of their 600-seat parliament, which, as I said earlier, is much weaker today than it was 5 years ago, thanks to Erdogan's success in reforming the Constitution. As of late Sunday night, Erdogan's party seems to have won the majority in the parliament, which means had he kept the position of prime minister instead of eliminating it, he'd essentially have been reelected tonight. But there's no more prime minister in Turkey. It's a presidential system. Surveys going into the election showed Erdogan losing favor as more and more Turkish voters blame him for rampant inflation, which hovers anywhere between 50 and 100%. They also blame him for an inadequate response after 2 earthquakes ravaged Turkey in February, killing 50,000. Some say many would still be alive if rampant corruption in Erdogan's party didn't lead to lax building codes. Millions were left homeless after the earthquakes, especially in regions where Erdogan is most popular, which might explain why he barely eked out a lead on Sunday. President Erdogan's challenger, Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu, that's the best I can do, I apologize, Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu, was leading in the polls before the election. He presents the most serious threat to Erdogan in 2 decades. Much of Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu's popularity flows from a promise that if elected president, he would restore power previously held by the parliament. He presents himself as the pro-democracy candidate. While Turkey is a member of NATO, it is not a member of the European Union, something Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu promises to change, with his entire coalition promising that if elected, Turkey would join the European Union. Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu has the support of the Kurds, which makes up anywhere between 15 to 20% of Turkey's population. Since 2015, thousands of Kurds have died as President Erdogan, cracked down on Kurdish separatists. Turkey has 64 million eligible voters, 3.5 million of whom live overseas, and their ballots, as of tonight, have yet to be counted. They're just beginning to count the overseas ballots, and that's where it stands right now. These are what the latest numbers show. Turkey's state-run news agency says Erdogan is leading, but not reaching the 50% threshold. He's got 49.4% of the vote. It's pretty close to 50%. His challenger, Kamil Kılıçdaroğlu, has close to 45% of the vote. Now, Erdogan did win 60% of the overseas ballots in the last presidential election, so it is conceivable he can still find enough votes from the overseas ballots. There are about 3.4 million of them. He may be able to find enough votes to push him over the top without needing a runoff. But Sunday night, Erdogan said he would accept the results no matter what. Very un-Trump-like, if you ask me. Erdogan said he would accept the results no matter what, insisting if he fails to hit 50%, he will take part in the May 28th runoff. Turkey is important, as I said earlier, because it straddles the East and the West. And whether you think President Erdogan is a strong man in the fashion of Orban in Hungary or Trump in America, the essential truth is Americans aren't special, but democracy is. What's going on around the world proves that Trump and the authoritarian impulses inside the Republican Party aren't special. We're just like every other country struggling to keep democracy. It's hard to keep a democracy or a republic or whatever you want to call the fragile system of checks and balances we barely have going here in America. America is not special, but democracy is. And if you don't protect and nurture it, you lose it. By all measures, America is less of a democracy than it was 15 years ago. You all know that. Freedom House, which measures freedom and democracy around the world, says America is becoming less free and less democratic, giving us a score last year of 83 out of a possible 100. We have fallen behind in the past 15 years. We have fallen behind countries like Uruguay, Taiwan, Great Britain, Sweden, Portugal, Norway, Slovenia. Slovenia? Yeah, Slovenia. Holland, Japan, Italy, Ireland, Germany, France, Austria, Finland, and Canada. When it comes to democracy, freedom, and openness, we are no longer a beacon to the world. So, what happened on January 6th was not special. Things like that happen all the time, all over the world. It can happen here because it's already happened. January 6th was blatant. It was on our TV for everyone to watch. But the slow erosion of our rights has been gradual. There's voter suppression laws, newspapers silenced by private equity groups, buying them all up, gerrymandering, money in politics, corporate monopolies buying up our leaders, seizing agencies that are supposed to regulate them. The shift towards an oligarchy is quite subtle, imperceptible, but it's happening. We are less free. We're less free politically, and therefore we're less free economically and socially. Some groups have more political rights than others here in America, depending on who the ruling class chooses to demonize. We, as Americans, are not special. Democracy is special, and other countries are doing it better than we are. Other countries are freer and more democratic than we are. I just rattled off the list. We're not free. We're among the least free people in the industrialized world. Other countries do freedom better than we do it, despite what our military industrial complex, who want to spread freedom by dropping bombs on foreigners, usually people of color, despite what our leaders and right-wing politicians with authoritarian impulses want you to believe, Americans are not free. We're not socially mobile. If you're born poor, you stay poor. People of color find it hard to vote. We can't get our politicians to do what we want, like pass an assault weapons ban. It's been left to the courts to decide all the major issues because our legislative branch is owned by corporations. We are becoming less free each day. January 6th really isn't what we need to fear. January 6th isn't what we need to fear. What we need to fear maybe more is another September 11th. What we need to fear is an excuse for our president to declare emergency powers like Erdogan did in Turkey in 2016 after that failed coup against him. Thanks to the National Emergencies Act passed in 1976 on the 200th anniversary of our nation's founding, Congress passed the National Emergency Act and handed over to the president 136 statutory emergency powers. To the president, emergency powers, 136 emergency powers, 13 out of 136 require a declaration from Congress. The remaining 123 emergency powers can be declared by the president without congressional approval. Now, maybe the Supreme Court could overrule these emergency powers, maybe, but it all depends on who the president is and who's sitting on the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, was all in on Trump declaring a national emergency before January 6. The president has the power right now to declare an emergency, to stop an election, to do whatever he wants. What he needs, even though he can do it, but what he needs to sustain the emergency is support from friendly judges, lawyers, members of Congress, and of course, the media. So, America, we are not special. Democracy is. All it takes is one emergency, one crypto strongman like Erdogan who wants it. Declare an emergency, consolidate power. It could be Erdogan in Turkey, Netanyahu in Israel, Orban in Hungary, Trump, or Ron DeSantis, or pretty much anyone the Republicans want in the Oval Office. You know, we've all gotten tired of hearing this is the most important election of your lifetime, right? Every election is the most important election of our lifetime. Well, with Trump or no Trump, turns out since 1776, every election has been the most important election of America's lifetime. Turkey right now is fighting for its democracy this evening, tomorrow, up until May 28th. Turkey is fighting for its democracy. Will you fight for ours? Will you vote? Will you demand action from your leaders? Will you cancel Netflix, put down the video games, and participate in what's left of our republic? Freedom is a muscle. It weakens without you and me exercising it. Turkey, like America, is less free tonight. America isn't special. Democracy is, or what's left of it. Please like this video. That's the best way to help this show. Please share it if you can. Please subscribe to my channel. We do office hours every Friday night at 8 p.m. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Cancel your subscription to Netflix and Hulu. Get going. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak.